The rope bit into Ethan Briggs' frozen hands as he dangled 15 feet down the cliff face, the Wyoming wind screaming past his ears. Below him, clinging to a brittle root over a 30-meter drop, was the wolf. Blood stained the snow beneath its claws. The animal's yellow eyes locked with his, not with aggression, but with something that twisted Ethan's gut. Resignation. His radio crackled. "Briggs, abort. Blizzard's 3 minutes out." The wolf's grip slipped an inch. Its whimper cut through the howling wind. Ethan's mind flashed to Sarah's face that morning. "Dad, if Ghost ever needs help, you'd save him, right?" The root cracked. Ethan's frost-bitten fingers reached down. "Hold on, boy," he whispered. He didn't know that saving this wolf would resurrect a man's darkest demons and force a reckoning no one could imagine. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Ethan Briggs had learned about grief the hard way. 3 years ago, breast cancer had stolen his wife Margaret from him, leaving behind a hollow-eyed widower and a 9-year-old daughter who stopped smiling. The oncologist's words still echoed in the sterile hospital room. "I'm sorry. There's nothing more we can do." Margaret had squeezed his hand one last time, her voice barely a whisper. "Every life deserves a chance, Ethan. Every single one. Promise me you'll remember that." He'd kept that promise by running. Packed up their Chicago apartment, loaded everything into a U-Haul, and drove west until the buildings disappeared and the mountains rose like cathedral spires. Glacier National Park in northern Montana became their sanctuary. Ethan traded his corporate security job for a ranger's badge, and Sarah traded her concrete playground for forests that stretched to the horizon. Now 45, Ethan wore his grief in the silver threading through his beard and the lines carved deep around his eyes. His uniform hung a bit loose. He'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. But the mountains had a way of filling hollow spaces, and slowly, painfully, they'd begun to heal. Sarah had inherited her mother's red hair and green eyes, along with that same stubborn compassion that had made Margaret stop for every injured bird, every lost dog. At 12, Sarah carried her grief differently than her father. She didn't run from it. She photographed it. Her room was covered in pictures, elk at sunset, ravens in fresh snow, and most frequently, a scarred gray wolf with a distinctive white patch on his chest. Ghost, she'd named him, because he appeared and vanished like smoke through the trees. For 6 months, she'd tracked him with her wildlife camera, documenting his solitary existence. "He's alone, Dad," she told Ethan one night, her voice thick with understanding. "Like us, after Mom died. But he keeps going. He's brave." Ethan had studied those photographs, the wolf's pronounced limp, the scar tissue visible even through thick fur, the way he always kept to the shadows. This was an animal that had survived something terrible. The old bullet wound in his hind leg told one story. The missing tip of his ear told another. This wolf knew suffering intimately. What Ethan didn't know was the wolf's real name, given by biologists who'd tracked him years ago, Lobo. Didn't know about Luna, the silver she-wolf who died in a trapper's snare while Lobo tore his own leg trying to free her. Didn't know about the 5 pups stolen, sold to private collectors who wanted exotic pets. Didn't know that this wolf had once led a pack of 9, his howl commanding respect across 20 square miles of wilderness. All Ethan knew was that his daughter loved this ghost, and that Margaret's last words had been about giving every life a chance. Even a wolf's life, especially a wolf's life. February 14th arrived with the kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals before it left your lungs. 20 degrees below zero, and the weather service was screaming about a blizzard rolling down from Canada. Ethan had started his patrol at dawn, checking the backcountry trails that most tourists were smart enough to avoid in winter. His truck's thermometer read -22 as he wound through Devil's Ridge, a stretch of forest road that hugged cliffs on one side and dropped into nothing on the other. The wolf known as Ghost, Lobo to the biologists who'd long since lost track of him, hadn't eaten in 5 days. His ribs pressed against his winter coat like prison bars. The injured hind leg that had never properly healed throbbed with each step, a constant reminder of the trap that had taken Luna from him 8 years ago. Age had stripped away his strength, his speed, everything that had once made him an apex predator. At 11 years old, he was ancient for a gray wolf. Most of his kind died by 6 or 7 in the wild. He'd spent the morning digging through snow for voles, managing to catch only one. The tiny rodent was gone in 2 bites, doing nothing to ease the grinding emptiness in his belly. He'd tried tracking a snowshoe hare, but his damaged leg had given out halfway through the chase, sending him sprawling into a snowdrift. The hare had disappeared into the underbrush, and Lobo had lain there for a long moment, the cold seeping through his fur, wondering if it might be easier to just stay down. But something had pulled him back to his feet, the same thing that had kept him alive through bullet wounds and trap injuries and the brutal exile from his pack. Not hope exactly. Wolves don't conceptualize hope the way humans do. It was something more fundamental. The will to see another sunrise. The possibility that tomorrow might bring a full belly and a warm place to sleep. That's when he smelled it. Blood. Fresh blood. Deer. The scent carried on the north wind, and Lobo's head snapped up, nostrils flaring, his stomach cramped with sudden, desperate hunger. Following his nose through the pines, he found the source. A young mule deer buck, maybe 2 years old, limping badly. It had been kicked by an elk. Lobo could see the massive bruise on its hindquarters where a hoof had connected. The deer was struggling through deep snow, heading toward the cliff area where the wind had swept some sections bare. Lobo's predator brain calculated odds with the cold efficiency of 10 million years of evolution. The deer was injured, slower than usual, but the terrain ahead was treacherous, steep slopes and ice-covered rock. One wrong step and both hunter and prey could plummet. The old wolf had survived this long by being cautious, by choosing easier prey, by knowing his limitations, but 5 days without food had eroded caution. Hunger was its own kind of madness. Lobo began the stalk, using the wind to mask his scent, moving through the trees with the ghost-like silence that had earned him Sarah's nickname. The deer sensed something. Its ears swiveled, its body tensed, but couldn't pinpoint the threat. It increased its pace, hobbling faster through the snow. The chase was on. For a few heartbeats, Lobo felt young again, felt the surge of adrenaline that had once made him fearless. His muscles remembered what his body could no longer fully deliver, the explosive sprint, the calculated trajectory, the moment when teeth found throat. He pushed harder, ignoring the screaming pain in his damaged leg. The deer panicked. Instead of heading down slope toward denser forest where its agility might have been an advantage, it ran upward, toward the cliff edge where the snow had drifted into deceptive pillows over sheet ice. Lobo followed, closing the distance, 20 yards, 15-10. The deer's hoof punched through a snow crust and it stumbled. Lobo lunged. His teeth caught nothing but air as the deer recovered and lurched forward. And then Lobo's injured leg, that old wound that had never truly healed, buckled beneath him. His momentum carried him forward, but his balance was gone. He hit an ice patch hidden beneath powder snow. The world tilted. His claws scraped frantically at frozen ground, finding no purchase. The cliff edge that had seemed distant suddenly yawned beneath him. Lobo's body slid sideways, front legs windmilling. For one terrible moment, he was suspended in space, the valley floor 30 meters below, rushing up to meet him. Then his right front paw caught something. A frozen root, gnarled and ancient, jutting from the cliff face about 15 feet down. His claws hooked into the wood with a force that sent lightning bolts of agony through his shoulder. His rear legs swung free, scrabbling at air. The root groaned under his 95 pounds. Lobo hung there, suspended between sky and death. He tried to pull himself up. His powerful shoulders, The only part of him that hadn't deteriorated with age, bunched and strained. For a moment, he actually rose a few inches, but his damaged hind leg couldn't find the cliff face, couldn't push, couldn't help, and his front paws, slipping on the ice-coated root, began to slide. The wolf did what wolves do. He fought. For 2 hours, he struggled, tried different positions, different angles, used his teeth to grab the root, nearly dislocating his jaw, kicked his rear legs against the rock face until his pads bled. The whole time, his claws carved long scratches into the frozen wood, leaving marks that would be visible for years. But physics and biology are cruel masters. An 11-year-old wolf with one bad leg, hanging from a root over a 30-meter drop, fighting hypothermia and exhaustion, there was only ever going to be one outcome. The images came to him unbidden, the way memory does when death is close. Luna's silver fur in moonlight, the way she'd press against his side on cold nights. The feeling of 5 tiny bodies nursing while he and Luna stood guard. The pride he'd felt hearing his own howl echo across the mountains, answered by his pack. Even the exile, painful as it was, had been proof he'd lived fully. Only a wolf who'd led could be overthrown. And there was one other memory, more recent. A red-haired girl with kind eyes who'd sit on a fallen log 100 yards from his den and just watch. Never approaching, never threatening. Sometimes she'd leave food, venison scraps, a whole fish once. She'd speak to him in soft tones he couldn't understand but recognized as gentle. "Hi, Ghost. It's okay. You're safe with me." The girl who smelled like sadness and hope mixed together. The girl who'd somehow seen him not as a threat, but as something worthy of care. Lobo's strength finally failed. His claws began their final slide down the ice-slicked root. He lifted his head toward the gray February sky, and from deep in his chest came a sound that was part howl, part whimper. Not a call for help. He knew his pack was gone, scattered or dead, not a challenge, just a farewell, an acknowledgement that he'd fought hard, survived long, and this was how it ended. He closed his eyes. His muscles relaxed. Luna would be waiting, he somehow knew. And that thought, impossible to prove but impossible to deny, brought peace. That's when he heard it, the rumble of an engine, the crunch of boots on snow, and a voice, rough with cold and surprise. "Jesus Christ, hold on, boy. Just hold on." Lobo's eyes opened. Above him, silhouetted against the gray sky, was a human, not the girl. A man. Wearing the green uniform Lobo had learned to associate with those who walked the forest but rarely hunted. The man's eyes were the same color as the red-haired girl's. And they held the same impossible thing. Compassion. Ethan had been thinking about Margaret when he heard the sound. It was Valentine's Day, their anniversary, and he'd been driving the ridge road in that particular kind of silence that comes with grief. 20 years they'd been married, 3 years she'd been gone. The mathematics of loss never balanced. He'd planned to stop at the cemetery on his way home, leave flowers at her headstone the way he did every year. Sarah had made a card that morning, decorated with pressed wildflowers she'd preserved from summer. For Mom, she'd written in careful cursive, "Miss you every day. Love, your little bird." Margaret had called her that, little bird, because Sarah was always flitting from one thing to another, curious and bright and impossible to keep still. The radio crackled with the Weather Service's increasingly urgent warnings. National Weather Service has issued a blizzard warning for all of northern Montana. Heavy snow, winds gusting to 60 miles per hour, visibility near zero, storm system arriving between 8 and 9 p.m. All residents should... That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to wind or trees or the tick of cooling engine parts. A howl, but not the kind he'd heard 1,000 times during his patrols. This wasn't territorial or communicative. This was the sound of something dying. Ethan killed the engine and stepped out into cold that hit him like a physical force. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees since dawn. His breath froze instantly, ice crystals catching in his beard. He stood perfectly still, listening. There, again, fainter now, coming from somewhere near the cliff edge, maybe 200 yards northeast. Every instinct told him to get back in the truck. The storm was coming. He was alone, and whatever was making that sound was probably beyond help anyway. Nature was cruel and efficient. Interfering usually just prolonged suffering. But Margaret's voice was in his head, as clear as if she were standing beside him. Every life deserves a chance, Ethan. Every single one. He grabbed his emergency pack from the truck bed. Rope, carabiners, first aid kit, thermal blankets, flares, the gear he carried on backcountry patrols but rarely needed. His radio went on his belt, his flashlight in his hand, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Under these clouds, it might as well have been dusk. The snow was waist-deep in places where it had drifted. Ethan pushed through it, following the sound. His knees ached, his lungs burned in the frozen air. He was 45 years old and in decent shape, but this kind of cold didn't care about fitness. It just leached heat and strength until there was nothing left. The cliff edge appeared suddenly through the blowing snow. Ethan dropped to his belly and crawled the last few feet, knowing that cornices could extend far beyond where solid rock ended. He peered over the edge. 15 feet down, clinging to a root with everything it had left, was the wolf. Ethan's heart stuttered. Even through the snow and distance, he recognized the white patch on its chest. Ghost. Sarah's ghost. The wolf she'd been photographing for months. The one whose picture was taped to her bedroom wall. The animal she'd named after something beautiful and ephemeral and precious. The wolf's eyes met his. They were amber gold, ancient, and completely aware. There was no begging in them, no plea, just acknowledgement. The wolf knew Ethan was there, knew what he was, and had already accepted that humans didn't save wolves. Oh, hell, Ethan breathed. He evaluated the situation with the cold calculation of someone who'd done rope rescue training. The cliff face was nearly vertical, ice-covered. The root the wolf clung to was cracking. He could see fresh splinters where the wood was giving way. The wolf probably weighed 90 to 100 pounds, injured, judging by how it held its rear leg, hypothermic for sure after hanging there for who knew how long. Impossible rescue under good conditions, potentially suicidal under these. Ethan pulled his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Briggs." Static then. "Go ahead, Briggs. I've got a situation at Devil's Ridge, mile marker 23. I need to report my position before the storm hits. If I'm not back in contact within 2 hours, send search and rescue to these coordinates." A pause. "Briggs, what situation? You should be heading in right now." He almost told her, almost said the words that would make this someone else's problem, but then he thought of Sarah's face when she realized Ghost was gone. Thought of her question from 2 weeks ago, asked so earnestly over breakfast. "Dad, if Ghost ever needed help, you'd save him, right? Even though he's wild?" And he'd answered, "Every life deserves a chance, honey. Your mom taught me that." "Animal situation," Ethan said into the radio. "Might be able to resolve it quickly. I'll check back in 30 minutes. "Briggs, the storm." "I know. Briggs out." He clipped the radio back to his belt and pulled out his phone. Hit Sarah's number. She answered on the second ring, slightly breathless. "Dad, you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just calling to say I might be a little late getting home. Storm's coming in and I need to check something. Be careful, okay?" Her voice was small. She'd already lost one parent. The fear of losing another was never far from the surface. "Always am." "Hey, Sarah, I love you. You know that, right?" A pause. "I know, Dad. Love you too. Why are you being weird?" He forced a laugh. "Not weird. Just wanted to make sure you knew. I'll be home soon. Pizza for dinner, your choice of toppings." "Even pineapple?" "Even pineapple, you little heathen." She giggled, and that sound was worth everything. "Okay. See you soon. Be safe." He ended the call and looked back at the wolf. It was still watching him, those amber eyes unblinking. "Your fan club would never forgive me if I left you here," Ethan muttered. and I made my daughter a promise." The wolf's head tilted slightly, as if it understood. Ethan uncoiled his climbing rope, 300 feet of kern mantle that had been rated for rescue operations. He found a solid pine tree 20 feet back from the cliff edge, wrapped the rope twice around its trunk, and tied it off with a figure-8 knot that could hold a car. Double-checked it, triple-checked it. His hands were already going numb despite the insulated gloves. He fashioned a makeshift harness from a second length of rope, something he could slip over the wolf's front legs and chest, if he could get close enough, if the wolf didn't attack, if the root didn't break, if a dozen other things didn't go catastrophically wrong. "If Margaret were here, she'd tell me I was an idiot," he said aloud. His voice sounded strange in the vast silence of the mountains. "But she'd also be right beside me doing the same stupid thing." He clipped a carabiner to his belt, threaded the main rope through it, and backed toward the cliff edge. The rope went taut. He tested it with his full weight. The tree held. "Okay, Ghost," he called down. "I'm coming. Try not to eat me, all right? My daughter's kind of attached to both of us." Ethan leaned back over the void and began his descent. The cliff face was even worse than it had looked from above. The rock was limestone, fractured and unstable, with a slick coating of ice that offered no friction. His boots skidded repeatedly, sending small cascades of rock and ice tumbling into the abyss below. The wind had picked up, gusting hard enough to swing him like a pendulum. 10 feet down, he was level with the wolf's head. The animal watched his approach with wary intensity, lips pulling back slightly to expose teeth. Not an aggressive snarl, a warning. "Stay back. I'm dangerous. Don't touch me." "I know, buddy," Ethan said softly. "You're scared. I would be too. But that route's not going to hold much longer, and I'm guessing you'd prefer not to become a permanent part of the landscape down there." He descended another foot, then another. The wolf's body was trembling, cold and exhaustion and adrenaline all taking their toll. Up close, Ethan could see the old scars more clearly. The notch in the ear, the twisted scar tissue around the hind leg. This animal had survived things that would have killed most creatures. "You're a fighter," Ethan murmured. "Sarah saw that in you. She's got a gift, my daughter. Sees the best in everything. Drives me crazy sometimes, but..." His voice caught. "She's so much like her mother that way." 15 feet down now. He was below the wolf, looking up at it. Could see the blood on its paws where claws had torn. The root was cracking worse, fresh splinters appearing even as he watched. Maybe 2 minutes before it gave way completely. Ethan pulled the rope harness from his belt. This was the dangerous part. He needed to get close enough to slip it over the wolf's head and front legs, then cinch it tight, which meant putting his hands within biting range of an injured, terrified wild animal. "Sarah's going to kill me if you kill me," he said, and reached up. The wolf lunged. The wolf's teeth caught Ethan's left hand, puncturing through the heavy glove and into the flesh beneath. Pain exploded white-hot up his arm, but Ethan didn't jerk away. Years of handling injured animals had taught him that sudden movements only escalated panic. Instead, he froze completely, letting the wolf hold his hand in its jaws without applying pressure. "Easy," he breathed, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." The wolf's amber eyes were wild, pupils dilated with terror. Its entire body shook, not just from cold now, but from the desperate, cornered animal fear that overrode every other instinct. But something in Ethan's stillness, his refusal to fight or flee, seemed to penetrate the panic. The pressure on his hand eased fractionally. "That's it," Ethan whispered. "That's right. I'm here to help. Sarah sent me, the girl with red hair. You know her, don't you? The one who leaves you food. Who sits and watches you like you're the most important thing in the world." At Sarah's name, the wolf's ear twitched. The grip on Ethan's hand loosened further. Not much. The teeth were still embedded in his palm, but enough that Ethan could feel circulation returning to his fingers. "She calls you Ghost," Ethan continued, keeping his voice low and steady despite the pain radiating through his arm. Says you're beautiful, brave. Says you remind her that it's possible to keep going even when everything hurts. His voice cracked. She needs you, buddy. She's already lost so much. Please don't make her lose you too. The wolf released his hand. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Blood immediately soaked through his glove, dark against the white snow, but he ignored it. Moving slowly, telegraphing every motion, he brought the rope harness up again. The wolf watched, but didn't snap this time. "I'm going to put this around you," Ethan said softly. "It's going to feel weird, but it's the only way to get you up. I need you to trust me, just for a few minutes. Can you do that?" The root cracked again, louder this time. A piece of it splintered off and tumbled into the void below. The wolf's claws scrabbled desperately for better purchase, but the ice offered nothing. Its rear legs swung free, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ethan thought they were both going over. He lunged upward and grabbed the wolf around its ribcage. The animal was nothing but bone and muscle and desperation writhing in his grip. Ethan's boots skidded on the cliff face, and suddenly they were both hanging from his climbing rope, his carabiner the only thing between them and a 30-meter fall. The wolf's weight, easily 95 pounds, dragged them down. Ethan's harness bit into his waist and shoulders. His damaged hand screamed in agony as he tried to maintain his grip. "Stop fighting me!" Ethan shouted. "I've got you!" "Stop!" The wolf went suddenly still. Not submission, exactly, more like a decision. It stopped thrashing and instead pressed itself against Ethan's chest, making itself as small as possible. Its heartbeat hammered against his sternum, rapid-fire terror that matched his own racing pulse. Working one-handed, his injured hand now completely useless, Ethan managed to slip the rope harness over the wolf's head and front legs. The animal tolerated it, though every muscle in its body remained coiled tight as wire. Ethan pulled the harness snug and clipped it to his own carabiner. "Okay," he panted. "Okay, we're connected. Now we just have to—" The root gave way with a sharp crack, like a gunshot. For one terrible second, they were falling. Then the climbing rope caught hard, jerking them to a violent stop that knocked the air from Ethan's lungs. They swung wildly against the cliff face, rocks and ice raining down around them. Ethan's shoulder slammed into limestone, and something in it made a grinding sound that promised weeks of pain. But they were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were still alive. "Okay," Ethan wheezed when he could breathe again. "Change of plans. We're both going up together. On 3, you push with your back legs against the rock. I'll climb the rope. Ready?" The wolf, of course, said nothing, but it was watching him with those unnervingly intelligent eyes, and Ethan could have sworn he saw understanding there. 1. Ethan gripped the rope above his head with his good hand. 2. He positioned his feet against the cliff face. 3. He hauled himself upward, muscles screaming. The wolf's hind legs found the rock and pushed. They rose 6 inches, then another 6. Ethan's arm felt like it was being torn from its socket, but he pulled again and again. The wolf pushed each time, its claws scraping against stone for any purchase it could find. 10 feet. They'd made it 10 feet, still 5 feet to go. Ethan's vision was starting to gray at the edges. His injured hand had gone from agonizing to worryingly numb. His good arm was cramping so badly he could barely keep his grip on the rope. The wolf's breathing had gone harsh and ragged. It was at the end of its strength, too. "Can't stop now," Ethan gasped. "Margaret, if you're watching, I could really use some of that stubborn strength of yours right about now." He pulled. The wolf pushed. 3 feet left. "And if we make it out of this, I'm never doing anything stupid again. I'm going to be the most boring, rule-following ranger in the history of the National Park Service. I'm going to fill out paperwork in triplicate and never take risks and—" His hand caught the edge of solid ground. With a desperate final surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, Ethan hauled himself and the wolf up and over the cliff edge. They collapsed in a tangle of rope and fur and frozen limbs, both gasping like landed fish. Snow immediately began covering them. The storm had arrived early, fat flakes falling so thick they obscured the tree line just 20 yards away. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Ethan could feel the wolf's heart still racing against his chest where they lay pressed together. His own pulse was thunder in his ears. Every part of him hurt. His hand, his shoulder, his arms, his back, everything. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it, you crazy animal." The wolf made a sound. Not quite a whimper, not quite a growl, something in between. It tried to stand, but its injured leg gave out immediately, and it collapsed back into the snow with a huffing sound of frustration. Ethan forced himself to sit up. His hand was still bleeding, leaving dark spots in the white snow that were immediately covered by fresh fall. The wind was howling now, visibility dropping to nothing. The temperature had plummeted at least another 10 degrees. They needed shelter. They needed warmth. They needed to get the hell out of here before they both froze to death. He looked at the wolf. It looked back at him. "This is the part where a normal person would call animal control," Ethan said. "Let the professionals handle it. But Sarah would never forgive me if I let them lock you up. And besides..." He reached out slowly, giving the wolf every chance to bite him again. When it didn't, he gently touched the white patch on its chest. The fur was matted with ice and blood, but beneath it, Ethan could feel the steady thump of the animal's heart. "You trusted me, stopped fighting me. That took courage." The wolf's eyes hadn't left his face. In the fading light, they glowed like embers. Ethan made his decision, probably his second incredibly stupid decision of the day, but he was apparently on a roll. He peeled off his heavy ranger's jacket and wrapped it around the wolf, creating a makeshift sling. The animal allowed this with only minimal resistance. It was too exhausted to fight, and maybe, just maybe, it understood that Ethan was trying to help. "My truck is about 200 yards that way," Ethan said, gesturing into the white void. "I'm going to carry you. If you bite me again, try to make it the other hand, okay? This one's had enough excitement for one day." He scooped the wolf into his arms, staggering under the weight. 95 pounds didn't sound like much, but distributed awkwardly across a body made of sharp angles and thrashing limbs, it felt like twice that. His shoulder ground and protested. His hand leaked blood that froze almost instantly on his skin. The walk back to the truck was a nightmare. The snow was falling so thick Ethan could barely see 3 feet ahead. He had to navigate by memory and instinct, praying he wasn't walking in circles. The wolf remained passive in his arms, not relaxed, every muscle still tense, but not fighting. Its head rested against Ethan's shoulder, and he could feel its harsh breathing against his neck. "Almost there," Ethan muttered, more to himself than the wolf. "Just a little further. Come on, Briggs. You didn't survive Margaret's death and single parenthood just to freeze to death on a mountain with a wolf in your arms. That's not how this story ends." The truck materialized out of the white like a hallucination. Ethan nearly sobbed with relief. He managed to get the tailgate open one-handed and laid the wolf gently in the bed. It immediately tried to stand again, still driven by wild instinct to escape, to flee, to not be trapped by humans. "Stop," Ethan said firmly. "Just stop. You're safe. I promise you, you're safe." Maybe it was his tone. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the wolf was simply too depleted to keep fighting. Whatever the reason, it sank back down, watching Ethan with wary, exhausted eyes as he covered it with emergency blankets from his gearbox. Heat-reflective silver fabric that would help prevent hypothermia. Ethan climbed into the cab, and his hand left a blood smear on the steering wheel. He stared at it for a moment, the reality of what he'd just done finally sinking in. He'd rappelled down an icy cliff in sub-zero temperatures. He'd been bitten by a wild wolf. He'd carried that wolf back through a blizzard, and now he was about to drive it home. His radio crackled. "Briggs, this is dispatch. You're overdue for check-in. What's your status?" He should tell them. Should say he'd been injured and needed medical assistance. Should mention he had a wild animal in his truck that by law should be turned over to Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. Instead he said, "Situation resolved. Heading home now. Roads are getting bad." Briggs out. He started the engine, turned the heat up to maximum, and pointed the truck toward home, toward Sarah, toward whatever came next. In the rearview mirror, through the falling snow, he could just make out the shape of the wolf in the truck bed. It had lifted its head and was watching him through the rear window. Their eyes met in the reflection, and Ethan could have sworn the wolf nodded.
The drive home took 40 minutes that felt like hours. The blizzard had transformed the mountain roads into white tunnels of uncertainty, where the edges of pavement disappeared into snowdrifts, and the center line was nothing but a memory. Ethan drove with both hands gripping the wheel. Even the injured one, though every bump sent fresh jolts of pain through his palm, and his eyes straining against the hypnotic swirl of snowflakes in the headlights. Every few seconds, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The wolf hadn't moved, just lay there in the truck bed wrapped in emergency blankets like some kind of surreal silver burrito. Its eyes occasionally caught the red glow of the taillights, flashing back at him like distant warning beacons. What the hell was he thinking? He was a federal park ranger. He knew the regulations backward and forward. Transporting wildlife without proper permits was illegal. Harboring a wolf, a predator, a species that stirred up controversy everywhere it went, could cost him his job. Get him fined, maybe even arrested if some ambitious prosecutor wanted to make an example. But then he thought of Sarah's face when she looked at those photographs, the softness in her voice when she talked about Ghost, the first real joy he'd seen in her since Margaret's funeral. Every life deserves a chance. His wife's voice was so clear in his memory that he actually looked at the passenger seat, half expecting to see her sitting there with that knowing smile she used to give him when he was overthinking things. The seat was empty, of course, had been empty for 3 years, but the principle remained. The lights of his house appeared through the storm like a constellation brought down to earth. Ethan had never been so grateful to see home. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, sitting for a moment in the sudden silence. The wind howled outside, rocking the truck gently. Snow was already accumulating on the windshield. The front door burst open and Sarah came running out in her stocking feet, her red hair whipping in the wind. "Dad! Oh my God, you're bleeding!" Ethan climbed out, catching her before she could slip on the ice. "I'm okay, honey. It's not as bad as it looks." "Your hand is covered in blood. That's pretty bad." She was looking at him with those green eyes, Margaret's eyes, wide with fear and concern. "I had to help an animal," Ethan said, "and I need you to stay calm about this, okay? Because this animal needs our help, and if you freak out, you're going to scare him worse than he already is." Sarah's expression shifted from fear to curiosity. "What kind of animal?" Instead of answering, Ethan led her to the back of the truck and lowered the tailgate. The wolf raised its head from the blankets, fixing Sarah with those amber eyes. Snow had accumulated on its muzzle, making it look even more ghost-like than usual. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. For a moment she just stood there, frozen, staring. Then in a whisper so soft, Ethan barely heard it over the wind, "Ghost?" The wolf's ear twitched at the name. Its tail, which had been still as stone, moved once, twice, a tentative wag. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "Dad, you saved Ghost. You actually saved him." She turned to Ethan with tears streaming down her face, and suddenly she was hugging him fiercely despite the blood and the cold and everything. "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." "Help me get him to the shed," Ethan said, his voice rough. "He's hurt and cold and we need to work fast." Sarah nodded, suddenly all business. She ran ahead to open the garden shed, a weathered structure that Ethan had insulated last fall when he'd been planning to use it as a workshop. There was a space heater inside, shelving with supplies, and enough room for the large dog crate he'd bought when they'd been considering getting a pet. That plan had fallen through when Margaret got sick, but he'd never gotten rid of the crate. Together, father and daughter carried the wolf to the shed. The animal had gone rigid again, every muscle tense, but it didn't struggle. Its eyes darted around, taking in this new environment with the hypervigilance of a creature that had learned the hard way that enclosed spaces often meant traps. They laid the wolf on a pile of old blankets inside the crate. Ethan had left the crate door open, making it a shelter rather than a prison, and the wolf immediately backed into the farthest corner, trying to make itself as small as possible. "It's okay," Sarah said softly, kneeling a few feet away. "You're safe here. I promise you're safe." The wolf watched her with those unblinking amber eyes. Its breathing was rapid and shallow, stress or pain or both. Up close, under the harsh LED shed lights, the extent of its injuries was more apparent. The old bullet wound on its hind leg was swollen and angry-looking, where the climb had reopened old scar tissue. Its paws were torn and bleeding, and there was something in its eyes, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went beyond physical trauma. "We need to treat his wounds," Ethan said. "But first, I need to take care of this." He held up his injured hand. The puncture wounds had stopped bleeding, but they needed to be cleaned and properly dressed before infection set in. "Go," Sarah said, not taking her eyes off the wolf. "I'll stay with him. I won't touch him or anything. I'll just be here, so he knows he's not alone." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say that leaving his 12-year-old daughter alone with a wild wolf was insane. But something in Sarah's face, that absolute certainty, that bone-deep compassion, stopped him. She was Margaret's daughter, and Margaret had always known how to gentle the wildest, most frightened creatures. "Keep the shed door open," Ethan said. "If he gets aggressive, you run. Don't hesitate. Just run." "He won't hurt me, Dad. Sarah, he won't. I know him. And he knows me." There was no arguing with that kind of faith. Ethan left the shed and went into the house, his hand throbbing with every heartbeat. In the bathroom, he ran water over the wounds, watching the blood swirl pink down the drain. The punctures were clean, at least. Wolves' teeth were sharp enough to make neat holes rather than ragged tears. He doused everything in hydrogen peroxide, gritting his teeth against the burning pain, then wrapped his palm in gauze and medical tape. The face that looked back at him from the bathroom mirror was haggard and pale, with shadows under the eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much grief carried for too long. But there was something else there, too. Something that hadn't been there this morning. A spark of something he'd thought he'd lost in the oncology ward 3 years ago. Purpose. When he returned to the shed 20 minutes later, carrying the first aid kit and a bowl of raw chicken from the freezer, he stopped in the doorway, struck by the scene before him. Sarah had shifted closer to the crate. Not much, maybe a foot, but enough that the wolf could have reached her if it wanted to. She was talking in a low, steady voice, the words themselves not really mattering, just the tone. Calm, safe, loving. "I've been watching you for 6 months," she was saying. "Every time I go into the woods, I look for you. I worry about you being alone, about whether you have enough to eat. Whether you're cold at night, I know you probably think humans are terrible. And you're mostly right, but not all of us are bad. Some of us want to help. Some of us see how brave and beautiful you are." The wolf's posture had changed, still wary, still ready to bolt, but no longer radiating quite so much fear. Its eyes hadn't left Sarah's face. "Mom used to say that every living thing just wants to be seen," Sarah continued. "Really seen, not judged or feared or used, just acknowledged, respected. And I see you, Ghost. I see how you keep going even though everything hurts. I see how you're scared right now but trying to be brave. I see you." The wolf made a sound, low and rumbling but not aggressive, almost questioning. Sarah slowly extended her hand, palm down, fingers curled under, not reaching toward the wolf, just offering, letting the wolf choose. "Don't," Ethan whispered from the doorway, but it was too late. The wolf had shifted forward, stretching its neck out, its nose working. It sniffed Sarah's hand once, twice. Then, so gently that Ethan almost missed it, the wolf's tongue touched Sarah's knuckles. Just a brief contact there and gone. Sarah's face transformed. The grief and loss that had lived there since her mother's death seemed to lift, just for a moment, replaced by pure wonder. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi, Ghost. I'm so glad you're here." Ethan set down the first aid kit and the chicken, moving slowly so as not to startle anyone. "We need to check his injuries." "I know." Sarah didn't move her hand away. The wolf was still sniffing it, its tail now giving slow, uncertain wags. "But maybe let him get used to us first. We have time." They didn't, really. The wolf's leg needed attention. Those torn paws needed cleaning. But Ethan found himself nodding anyway. Sometimes healing wasn't about efficiency. Sometimes it was about trust. He sat down on the shed floor, his back against the wall, watching his daughter commune with a wild animal while the blizzard raged outside. The space heater hummed quietly, filling the shed with warmth. Snow piled against the windows, and somewhere in the house the clock chimed 7 times, marking the hour. Eventually the wolf's breathing slowed. Its eyes began to droop. Exhaustion was finally winning over fear and adrenaline. Sarah carefully withdrew her hand and scooted back to sit beside her father. "He's going to be okay," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "I hope so, honey. He is, because he has us now, and we don't give up on the people or animals we love." Ethan put his good arm around his daughter and pulled her close. She leaned into him, and for a moment they just sat there in the warm silence, listening to the wolf's gradually steadying breath. "Mom would have loved this," Sarah said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, his voice thick. "She really would have." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the Montana mountains, but inside the shed, 3 souls, 2 human, 1 wolf, had found something they'd all been missing. A family, however strange and impossible. The wolf's eyes finally closed. In sleep, the tension left its body, and it looked less like a wild predator and more like what it really was. An old, injured animal that had survived far more than any creature should have to endure. Sarah got up and gently draped another blanket over the wolf, tucking it around its body. The animal stirred, but didn't wake. "Sleep, Ghost," she whispered. "You're home now." And against all odds, all logic, all reason, it felt true. The next week passed in a strange bubble of cautious hope. The blizzard raged for 3 days, burying everything under 4 feet of snow and making travel impossible. Ethan called into work, claiming the roads were too dangerous, which was true, and didn't mention the wolf recovering in his garden shed. Sarah's school was closed. The world narrowed to just their property, the howling wind, and the animal they were learning to care for. The wolf, Ghost, as they'd fully committed to calling him now, healed slowly. That first night, while he slept the exhausted sleep of the traumatized, Ethan had managed to clean and dress the worst of his wounds. The torn paws, the reopened bullet wound on his hind leg, the dozens of smaller cuts and abrasions from the cliff. Ghost had woken once during this, his eyes snapping open with alarm, but Sarah had been there, speaking in that soft voice, and the wolf had allowed Ethan to continue. By the second day, Ghost was eating small amounts. Sarah had researched wolf diets online and prepared meals of raw chicken, beef, and the occasional egg. She'd sit just outside the crate and push the food bowls forward, then retreat to give Ghost space. At first, he'd wait until they left the shed entirely before eating. By day 4, he was eating while Sarah sat quietly nearby, watching him with those patient green eyes. "He trusts you more than me," Ethan observed one afternoon, standing in the doorway while Sarah coaxed Ghost to take a piece of meat from her hand. "That's because I don't hover like a worried dad," Sarah said with a slight smile. "I just am. I exist near him without needing anything from him. That's what trust looks like." Ethan marveled at his daughter's wisdom. When had she grown up? When had she learned these things? Or maybe she'd always known them, inherited from Margaret along with that red hair and those impossible-to-lie-to eyes. By day 6, Ghost was standing without falling. His injured leg still didn't bear weight properly. The limp would likely never fully heal, but he could move around the shed, investigating corners, testing the boundaries of this strange new world he'd found himself in. He'd stopped backing into the corner of the crate and had begun sleeping in the open, stretched out on the blankets Sarah had arranged for him. On day 7, Sarah woke her father at dawn by shaking his shoulder urgently. "Dad, Dad, you have to see this." Ethan stumbled out of bed, his mind immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. Ghost had escaped. Ghost had gotten aggressive. Ghost had... In the shed, Sarah stood completely still, barely breathing, and Ghost, the wild wolf who'd been hanging from a cliff just a week ago, was lying with his head resting on Sarah's foot. "How long has he been like that?" Ethan whispered. "I came out half an hour ago to feed him," Sarah whispered back. "He ate and then he just came over and laid down. I didn't move. I've been standing here frozen for 20 minutes and my leg is asleep. But Dad, he chose to be near me. He chose it." The wolf's eyes were open, watching them with that alert intelligence that never quite dimmed. But there was no tension in his body, no readiness to flee. He looked impossibly content. "Well," Ethan said carefully, "I guess that settles the question of whether he's warming up to us." That afternoon the sun finally broke through the clouds. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into a crystal palace of snow and ice. Ethan knew he needed to call someone. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, at minimum. There were protocols for this kind of thing, proper channels, legal requirements. He was reaching for his phone when the knock came at the door. Ethan's blood ran cold. Through the window he could see a truck in the driveway, a big Ford F-350 with Mercer Ranch painted on the door. And standing on his porch, hat in hand, was Thomas Mercer. Mercer was 58 years old and looked every year of it. His face was weathered leather, carved with lines that spoke of hard work and harder losses. His eyes, blue as glacier ice, held the kind of hollowness that came from burying a spouse. Ethan recognized that look. He saw it in his own mirror every morning. "Mr. Briggs," Mercer said when Ethan opened the door. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much in a while. "I apologize for showing up unannounced, but word travels fast in a small town and I heard you've got yourself a wolf." Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the doorframe, blocking entry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please." Mercer held up his hands, showing they were empty. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because that wolf, if it's the one I think it is, belongs to me." "Belongs to you?" Ethan's voice went flat and dangerous. "Wolves don't belong to anyone." Poor choice of words. Mercer shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "What I mean is, I've been tracking that particular animal for 2 years. White chest patch, scar over the left eye, pronounced limp on the right hind leg. Sound familiar? Ethan said nothing, which was answer enough. That wolf killed 30 of my sheep 10 years ago, Mercer continued. More than that, he was there the night my son stopped speaking, the night that started the chain of events that ended with my wife in a grave and my boy unable to say her name at the funeral. His voice cracked. So you'll understand why I need you to turn him over to me. So you can kill him. Not a question. So I can have closure. Mercer met his eyes. I've been hunting that animal for 2 years, Mr. Briggs. Every time I got close, he vanished like smoke, like a ghost. Now he's in your shed, injured, trapped. This is my chance. The only chance I might get. Behind Ethan, Sarah's voice rang out clear and hard. He wasn't there. Both men turned. Sarah stood in the hallway, her small frame rigid with fury. Ghost wasn't anywhere near your ranch 10 years ago. I've been documenting him with wildlife cameras for 6 months. I sent all my data to Dr. Emily Crawford at Montana Wildlife Services. She confirmed his identity against their tracking database. 10 years ago, Ghost was part of a pack 200 miles north of here. He didn't come to this area until 8 years ago, and by then he was alone. He was never part of any pack that attacked livestock. Mercer's face had gone very still. That's not possible. It's true. Sarah pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. Look, here's Dr. Crawford's email. Here are the tracking reports. Ghost has a distinctive genetic marker. That white chest patch is hereditary and rare. There are only 17 wolves in Montana with it, and all of them have been tracked since birth. Ghost's lineage is documented. He wasn't even in Paradise Valley when your ranch was attacked. Ethan watched Mercer's face as the man read Sarah's phone screen, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched something fundamental crack behind those glacier blue eyes. I was wrong, Mercer said, his voice barely audible. All this time, 2 years of tracking, of planning, and it wasn't even him? He looked up, and Ethan saw tears streaming down the weathered face. I convinced myself it was him because I needed someone to blame, something to hunt, a monster to kill so I could sleep at night. He sank down onto the porch step, the phone falling from his hands. My son hasn't spoken in 10 years. My wife took her own life because she couldn't bear watching him suffer. And I've spent every day since trying to hurt something the way I was hurt. But it was the wrong animal. An innocent animal. Sarah stepped forward, her earlier fury softening into something gentler. You're not the only one who lost someone, Mr. Mercer. My mom died 3 years ago. Cancer. And for a long time I was angry at everything. Angry at doctors who couldn't save her. Angry at God for taking her. Angry at my own body for being healthy when hers wasn't. That anger almost killed me. It was eating me from the inside. What changed? Mercer's voice was broken. Ghost. Sarah glanced back toward the shed. Watching him survive alone, injured, abandoned by his own pack. Watching him keep going day after day, even though everything hurt. It made me realize that pain doesn't have to make us cruel. It can make us stronger, kinder, more aware of other people's suffering. Mercer wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Your daughter is wise beyond her years, Mr. Briggs. She's her mother's daughter, Ethan said quietly. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the drip of melting snow from the roof. Then Mercer stood, brushing ice crystals from his jeans. I should go. I apologize for disturbing you. And for everything else. Wait. Ethan surprised himself by saying it. Would you like to meet him? Ghost, I mean. Maybe it would help. Maybe seeing that he's just an old, injured animal, not a monster, might give you what you're looking for. Mercer looked uncertain. I don't want to upset him. He's actually pretty calm now, Sarah said. If you move slowly and speak softly, if you come with kindness instead of hate. They walked to the shed together, the three of them, their boots crunching in the snow. Sarah opened the door quietly, and warm air spilled out, along with the smell of animal and blankets and the space heater's electric heat. Ghost was awake, lying on his nest of blankets. When he saw Ethan and Sarah, his tail wagged. When he saw Mercer, he went very still. Easy, Ghost, Sarah said softly. This man isn't here to hurt you. He just needs to understand some things. Mercer stood in the doorway, staring at the wolf. He's so much smaller than I remembered. In my head, he was massive, a monster with teeth like knives. But he's just old and hurt and scared. He's 11 years old, Ethan said. That's ancient for a wolf in the wild. He survived bullet wounds, trap injuries, and losing his entire family. He was exiled from his pack 2 years ago and has been alone ever since. Exiled, Mercer repeated. Like me. I exiled myself from my community, from my neighbors, from everyone who tried to help after Linda died. I told myself it was because they didn't understand, but really, I just wanted to be alone with my pain. Ghost had risen to his feet, watching Mercer with those unblinking amber eyes. Slowly, hesitantly, the wolf limped forward until he was at the edge of his blanket nest, as close to Mercer as the space allowed. He's not afraid of you, Sarah observed. That's weird. He should be afraid. You're a stranger. But it's like he can tell you're not a threat. Maybe he recognizes a fellow exile, Mercer said. He knelt down, careful to stay at the door, not entering Ghost's space. I'm sorry, he said to the wolf. I'm sorry I hunted you. Sorry I wanted you dead. Sorry I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. His voice cracked again. I've been so angry for so long that I forgot how to be anything else. Ghost tilted his head, that universal canine gesture of curiosity. Then, in a movement that made all three humans hold their breath, the wolf limped forward until he was standing directly in front of Mercer. They stared at each other, man and wolf, both scarred, both damaged, both survivors of losses that had nearly destroyed them. Ghost's nose touched Mercer's hand just once, just a brief contact, and Thomas Mercer, rancher and widower and broken father, broke down completely. He sobbed the way men sob when they've been holding it in for years, great heaving gasps that shook his entire frame. I miss her so much, he choked out. I miss Linda every single day, and I don't know how to live in a world where she doesn't exist. Sarah knelt beside him, this 12-year-old child who understood grief in ways no child should have to. You live by remembering that she loved you, and that she'd want you to be happy, that she'd want you to forgive yourself, and forgive the world, and find peace. Ghost, astonishingly, lay down and rested his chin on Mercer's knee. Ethan's throat tightened. He'd spent the last week watching this wolf learn to trust again. Now he was watching a man do the same thing, and somehow, impossibly, they were helping each other. When Mercer finally composed himself, he gently touched the top of Ghost's head. The wolf allowed it. Thank you, Mercer whispered, for showing me that not everything has to be about revenge, that some things can be about healing instead. He stood slowly, and Ghost backed away respectfully, returning to his blanket nest. Mercer turned to Ethan and Sarah. If you need anything, food for him, supplies, help with the law if Fish and Wildlife comes asking questions, you call me. I owe this animal a debt I can never fully repay. We'll call, Ethan promised. After Mercer left, Sarah turned to her father. That was intense. Yeah, Ethan agreed. Yeah, it was. They looked at Ghost, who was watching them with that knowing expression that suggested he understood far more than a wolf should be able to. His tail wagged once. I think he's going to be okay, Sarah said. I think we all are. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan allowed himself to believe it might be true. The peace lasted exactly 11 more days. On February 22nd, 3 weeks after Ethan had pulled Ghost from the cliff, Sarah came down with a fever. Nothing serious at first, just the sniffles, a slight temperature, the kind of thing kids got all the time. But by afternoon she was running 102 degrees and complaining of chills despite being wrapped in blankets on the couch. I'm fine, Dad, she insisted, even as her teeth chattered. I just need to feed Ghost. I'll feed Ghost. You need to rest. But he expects me. If I don't come, he'll worry. The fact that his daughter was more concerned about the wolf's emotional state than her own health was simultaneously touching and exasperating. I'll tell him you're sick. Wolves understand sick. Ethan bundled up and headed to the shed with Ghost's evening meal, 2 pounds of raw beef and a chicken quarter. When he opened the door, Ghost immediately stood, his tail wagging in anticipation. But when he saw it was Ethan alone, his ears flicked back in confusion. Sarah's not feeling well, Ethan explained, setting down the food bowls. She'll be back tomorrow. It's just you and me tonight, buddy. Ghost approached the food cautiously, sniffed it, but didn't eat. Instead, he went to the door and whined, looking out toward the house. She's okay, Ethan assured him. Just a fever, nothing serious. But Ghost continued to whine, pacing between the food and the door, clearly agitated. He'd howl once, then look at Ethan as if asking permission or demanding action. The bond between the girl and the wolf had grown stronger than Ethan had realized. Fine, Ethan sighed. Come on. But just for a minute, and you have to be calm. She's sick and needs rest. He opened the shed door, and Ghost limped out immediately, heading straight for the house. Ethan had to jog to keep up, his boots slipping on the icy path. Ghost stopped at the back door, looking back at Ethan expectantly. This was insane, bringing a wolf into his house, but nothing about the last 3 weeks had been sane, so why stop now? Sarah was dozing on the couch when they entered. At the sound of movement, her eyes fluttered open. When she saw Ghost, her face transformed despite the fever flush on her cheeks. Ghost, you came to check on me? The wolf approached, cautiously, sniffing her hand, her face, clearly smelling the sickness on her. Then he lay down on the floor beside the couch, his head resting on his paws, positioned so he could see both Sarah and the door. Guard position. See, Dad? Sarah smiled weakly. He's worried about me. Apparently. Ethan stood there, watching the wild wolf who'd made himself at home on their living room floor. Okay, Ghost can stay for a bit. But Sarah, you need to take this medicine and get some real sleep. He gave her ibuprofen for the fever and made her drink a full glass of water. Within minutes, she was asleep again, her breathing deep and even. Ghost didn't move, just watched her with those amber eyes, occasionally sniffing the air as if monitoring the progress of her illness. Ethan was about to return to the kitchen when headlights swept across the front window. A vehicle pulling into the driveway. He moved to the window and felt his stomach drop. Thomas Mercer's truck, and beside it, another vehicle, a county sheriff's cruiser. Ethan quickly ushered Ghost back toward the kitchen. Bedroom. Now, go. Ghost resisted, not wanting to leave Sarah, but Ethan was insistent. I know you want to protect her, but if they see you, it's going to cause problems for all of us. Go. Reluctantly, Ghost limped toward the back of the house. Ethan guided him into the master bedroom and closed the door, then took a breath and answered the knock. Mercer stood on the porch, and beside him was Deputy Sheriff Jake Morrison, a man in his 50s who Ethan knew from community meetings. Morrison's expression was professionally neutral, but Mercer looked deeply uncomfortable. "Evening, Briggs," Morrison said. "Sorry to bother you. Got a report that you might be harboring wildlife illegally. Mind if we come in?" "Who filed the report?" Ethan asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. "Anonymous tip, but the caller was pretty specific about details. Said you've had a gray wolf on your property for 3 weeks. That true?" Ethan's mind raced. He could lie, but Morrison would want to search, and lies only made everything worse once the truth came out. "I rescued an injured wolf from a cliff 3 weeks ago, yes. I've been providing medical care while it heals. That's a violation of the Endangered Species Act," Morrison said. "Even with good intentions, you're required to report injured wildlife to Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks within 24 hours. You know that." "I do know that," Ethan admitted. "And I should have called. But the wolf was in bad shape, and I was afraid they'd euthanize him rather than treating his injuries." "That's not your decision to make." Morrison's tone was gentle but firm. "I'm going to need you to turn the animal over to the proper authorities." Behind Ethan, a voice said, "You can't take Ghost." Everyone turned. Sarah had appeared from the living room, wrapped in blankets, her face flushed with fever. "He's not just some random wolf. He's special. Sarah, honey, go back to bed," Ethan said. "No." Her voice cracked, and Ethan could hear the tears threatening. "Ghost has been through so much. Losing his family, being shot, living alone for years. We're the first people who've ever been kind to him. If you take him away now, it'll break him. It'll break all of us." Morrison looked pained. "Miss, I understand you've formed an attachment, but this is a safety issue. Wolves are wild animals. They're unpredictable. Someone could get hurt." "He's not unpredictable," Sarah insisted. "He's gentle. He's been here for 3 weeks and hasn't shown aggression once. He's been eating from my hand, sleeping near me. He was just in our living room watching over me because he knew I was sick. Does that sound like a dangerous animal?" "That sounds like a wolf that's getting too comfortable with humans," Morrison said, "which is actually more dangerous in the long run. He loses his fear, gets comfortable, and then one day his wild instincts kick in and someone gets mauled." "That's not—" A howl cut through the conversation, long, mournful, coming from the back of the house. Ghost had heard the raised voices and was responding the only way he knew how. The sound was heartbreaking, not aggressive but pleading. "Don't take me away. Don't leave me alone again." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "That's the wolf?" "That's Ghost," Sarah said. "And he's scared because he can hear us fighting and he thinks someone's going to hurt him again, because that's all humans have ever done to him before us." Mercer, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Deputy Morrison, if I could say something." "Go ahead, Tom." "I'm the one who called in the anonymous tip," Mercer said, and Ethan felt betrayal surge hot in his chest. "I did it because I was angry, because some part of me still wanted that wolf gone, even after everything, even after understanding I'd been wrong about him." He took a breath. "But I'm asking you now not to take him. I'm asking you to let me withdraw the complaint." Morrison frowned. "Tom, you can't just—" "I've been carrying hate in my heart for 10 years, Mercer continued. "That hate took my wife from me, took my son's voice, nearly took my humanity. And 3 weeks ago, that wolf, the one I'd been hunting, the one I wanted dead, he looked at me with more compassion than I've shown any living thing since Linda died. He forgave me without me even asking. If you take him now, you're not protecting anyone. You're just teaching my son that there's no redemption, that once you're broken, you stay broken. This isn't about feelings, Tom. It's about the law." "Then change the law." Mercer's voice rose. "Or bend it. Or look the other way. You've got discretion, Jake. Use it. Because if you take that animal, you're taking the one thing that's given this little girl hope. You're taking the thing that made a bitter old man remember how to be human, and for what? To follow a regulation that was written by people who never met this specific wolf in this specific situation? Morrison looked at Ethan. Is the animal secured? He's in the bedroom. The door's closed. And he hasn't shown any aggressive behavior. Be honest. He bit my hand once, Ethan admitted. The day I rescued him, he was terrified and in pain, and I was a stranger trying to grab him while he was hanging from a cliff. Since then, nothing. He's been completely docile. He eats from Sarah's hand. He watches TV with us. He's more like a dog than a wolf at this point. That's the problem, Morrison said. Habituated wolves are unpredictable. If he gets out, encounters strangers who don't know him, someone could get hurt. So we make sure he doesn't get out, Sarah said. We build a proper enclosure, we get the right permits, we do everything legally. Just don't take him away, please. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Finally he sighed. I must be out of my mind. Here's what's going to happen. You have 48 hours to contact Dr. Emily Crawford at Montana Wildlife Services. She's the state expert on wolf behavior and rehabilitation. You get her out here to evaluate the animal. If she says he's safe to keep under supervised conditions, and if she's willing to sponsor a special permit, then we can talk about making this legal. If she says he needs to go to a wildlife sanctuary or be relocated, then that's what happens. Agreed? Agreed, Ethan said immediately. And in the meantime, that wolf doesn't leave your property, not even to the shed. He stays inside where you can monitor him constantly. If I get one call about a wolf sighting near here, I'm coming back with Fish and Wildlife and he's gone. Understood? Understood. Thank you, Deputy. Morrison nodded and turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope Crawford gives you good news. My wife and I lost our daughter to leukemia 5 years ago. I know what it's like to hold on to something that makes the pain bearable. I won't take that away from you unless I absolutely have to. After Morrison left, Mercer lingered on the porch. I'm sorry for calling it in. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting the community. But really I was just trying to control something because I've felt so out of control since Linda died. Why did you change your mind? Ethan asked. Because I called my son after I filed the report. Told him what I'd done. And Sam, Mercer's voice caught. Sam said his first full sentence in 10 years. He said, Dad, please don't hurt the wolf. He's trying to heal, just like us. 10 years of silence, and that's what brought his voice back. The thought of an innocent animal being punished for my mistakes. Sarah, who had been listening from inside, opened the door wider. How is Sam doing? Better, talking more each day. His therapist says the breakthrough with the wolf might have given him permission to stop punishing himself. He's been carrying guilt about his mother, thinking that if he'd never gone out that night, if he'd never seen those wolves, she'd still be alive. Seeing Ghost be forgiven helped him believe he could be forgiven too. He should come visit, Sarah said. Ghost would like him, and maybe it would help Sam to spend time with him, to see that he's not scary, that he's just another creature trying to survive. I think Sam would like that very much. After Mercer left, Ethan opened the bedroom door. Ghost was sitting right on the other side, clearly having listened to everything. His amber eyes moved between Ethan and Sarah, questioning. It's okay, Ghost, Sarah said, going to him and wrapping her arms around his neck despite the fever making her weak. You get to stay. We're going to figure this out. We're not going to let anyone take you away. The wolf leaned into her embrace, and Ethan was struck by the absolute trust in that gesture. This animal who had been shot, trapped, exiled, and left to die, he had chosen to trust again, had chosen to believe that not all humans were cruel, had chosen hope over despair. If a wolf could do that, what excuse did any human have for choosing otherwise? That night, Ghost slept on the floor beside Sarah's bed while Ethan kept watch from the doorway. Sarah's fever had broken around midnight, and she was sleeping peacefully now, one hand dangling off the bed to rest on Ghost's fur. Tomorrow, Ethan would call Dr. Crawford, would start the process of making this strange arrangement legal, would fight whatever battles needed fighting to keep this wolf safe. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of gratitude for the animal who had taught his daughter about resilience, for the stranger who had learned to forgive, for the deputy who had chosen compassion over regulation, for all the small miracles that had led to this moment. "Thank you, Margaret," he whispered into the darkness, "for teaching us that every life deserves a chance, for showing us how to love broken things back to wholeness, for being with us still in all the ways that matter." The wolf's ear twitched as if he'd heard, and outside, the Montana wind carried that whisper up into the stars, where perhaps someone was listening after all. Dr. Emily Crawford arrived the next morning with a clipboard, a medical bag, and 20 years of experience studying wolf behavior across Montana. She was a woman in her early 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. Ethan had worked with her before on various wildlife issues in the park, and he knew she had a reputation for being tough but fair. "So this is the famous Ghost," she said, standing in the doorway of the living room where the wolf lay stretched out near the fireplace. Sarah sat cross-legged beside him, one hand resting on his flank. Ghost's tail thumped once against the floor in greeting, but he didn't get up. "He's been with us for 3 weeks," Ethan explained. "Completely non-aggressive, eats from Sarah's hand, sleeps in the house at night. He's more comfortable around us than most dogs would be after that short a time." Crawford set her bag down and pulled out a small notebook. "Tell me everything. Start with how you found him." Ethan walked her through it all. The cliff rescue, the bite on his hand. He showed her the healing puncture scars, Ghost's injuries and recovery, the way he'd bonded almost instantly with Sarah, the encounter with Mercer, the deputy's visit last night. Crawford listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. When Ethan finished, she turned her attention to Sarah. "And you're the primary caregiver?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said. "I feed him, clean his bedding, monitor his health. Dad helps, but Ghost trusts me more. I think because I'm smaller and less threatening, and because I was watching him for months before he came here, so he knew my scent." "You were tracking him?" Crawford's eyebrows rose. "Show me your documentation." Sarah pulled out her laptop and opened folders of photos, videos, observation notes organized by date. Crawford spent 20 minutes reviewing everything, occasionally asking questions. "This is remarkably thorough work," she said finally. "You've documented behavior patterns that even our field researchers miss, the way he favors that right hind leg, his preference for hunting at dusk rather than dawn, his avoidance of open spaces." She looked at Sarah with new respect. "How old are you?" 12. "You have a gift for this. Have you thought about studying wildlife biology?" Sarah's face lit up. "Really? You think I could?" "I think you already are." Crawford closed the laptop and stood. "Now I need to examine Ghost directly. Can you help me with that?" "Of course." Crawford approached slowly, her body language deliberately non-threatening. She knelt about 5 feet from Ghost and extended her hand, palm down. "Hello, old man. I hear you've been through quite an ordeal." Ghost sniffed the air, processing her scent. Then, with Sarah's gentle encouragement, he limped over and sniffed Crawford's hand. His tail wagged uncertainly. "Good boy," Crawford murmured. "I'm just going to check you over, all right? Sarah, can you stay close? He'll be calmer if you're here." Over the next 30 minutes, Crawford conducted a thorough examination. She checked Ghost's teeth, his eyes, his ears, palpated his abdomen and felt along his spine, examined the old bullet wound on his hind leg and the newer injuries from the cliff incident. Ghost allowed all of it with only minor signs of stress, a few whines when she touched tender areas but no aggression whatsoever. "He's approximately 11 years old based on tooth wear," Crawford said, making notes. "Significantly underweight, probably about 15 pounds below optimal. Multiple old injuries, all consistent with what you'd expect from an adult male who's been living rough. The bullet wound is at least 8 years old and was never properly treated. It's amazing he can walk on that leg at all." "Is that why he was exiled from his pack?" Sarah asked. "Likely. When an alpha can no longer hunt effectively, younger males challenge him. It's natural pack behavior, not cruelty. But it does mean Ghost has been surviving alone with a severe handicap for a long time." Crawford sat back on her heels. "The fact that he's alive at all speaks to remarkable intelligence and adaptability." "So, what's your recommendation?" Ethan asked, his stomach tight with anxiety. "Can he stay?" Crawford was quiet for a moment, studying Ghost with professional detachment. Then she looked at Sarah, at the way the girl's hand rested protectively on the wolf's back, at the way Ghost leaned into her touch like it was the only thing anchoring him to earth. "Officially, my recommendation should be relocation to a wildlife sanctuary," Crawford said. "Ghost has been habituated to human presence. He's lost his fear response. In theory, that makes him dangerous. Not to you, but to others he might encounter who don't understand wolf behavior." "But?" Sarah's voice was small, hopeful. "But," Crawford smiled slightly, "this is an exceptional case. Ghost is elderly, permanently disabled. He couldn't survive in the wild anymore. He'd starve or be killed by younger wolves within weeks. The sanctuary facilities are currently at capacity, and frankly, the stress of transport and relocation would likely kill an animal his age and condition." She made another note on her clipboard. "More importantly, Ghost has formed a bond here, a deep one. Separating him from Sarah at this point would be psychologically devastating for both of them." "So he can stay?" Ethan hardly dared to believe it. "Under specific conditions, yes. You'll need to apply for an educational exhibition permit. That means Ghost officially becomes an educational ambassador. You'll be required to give presentations, schools, community groups, etc., about wolf behavior and conservation. I'll need to inspect your facilities quarterly. Ghost must be contained in a proper enclosure when you're not directly supervising him. And if he shows any signs of aggression toward any person at any time, the permit is revoked immediately, non-negotiable." "We'll do it," Sarah said immediately. "Whatever it takes. We'll build the best enclosure in Montana, and I'll do presentations. I'll tell everyone about how amazing wolves are, about how Ghosts survive things that would kill most animals, about why they deserve protection and respect." "I believe you will." Crawford handed Ethan a stack of forms. "Fill these out. I'll sponsor your application and fast-track it through the system. With any luck, you'll have official approval within 2 weeks." After Crawford left, Sarah threw her arms around her father. "He gets to stay." "Ghost gets to stay. He does," Ethan agreed, hugging her back. "But honey, we have a lot of work to do. That enclosure she mentioned, it needs to be substantial. And the educational presentations, that's a serious commitment." "I know. I don't care. It's worth it." Over the next month, the Briggs property transformed. Thomas Mercer proved to be a man of his word, showing up the day after Crawford's visit with his sons, Jake, 22, and Sam, 17. Sam was a quiet young man with his father's blue eyes and a hesitant way of speaking, as if he was still getting used to the sound of his own voice. "We're here to help build," Mercer announced. "And before you argue about not needing help, understand that I'm doing this for Sam as much as for you. He needs to see things built instead of destroyed. Needs to be part of something good." The enclosure they built together was extraordinary. 2,000 square feet of space, with a tall chain-link fence buried 3 feet underground to prevent digging out, a heated shelter for winter, logs and rocks for climbing and sunbathing, a small wading pool for cooling off in summer, natural vegetation left intact where possible to maintain a wild feel. Sam took special interest in the project. He'd arrive every day after school, sometimes not speaking at all, just working alongside the others. But slowly, gradually, he began to open up. It started with single words: hammer, nails, thanks, then phrases. That looks good. Should we move this? Eventually, full conversations. One afternoon, Sam was working on the shelter roof while Ghost watched from the porch. The wolf had been observing the construction with apparent interest, his tail wagging whenever Sarah checked on the progress. "Can I meet him?" Sam asked suddenly, looking at Sarah. "I mean, really meet him?" "Not just see him from far away." Sarah glanced at her father, who nodded. "Come on, but move slowly and let him come to you. Don't reach for him first." They sat on the porch, Sam folding his long legs awkwardly. Ghost watched the new person with cautious curiosity. Minutes passed. Then Ghost stood, limped over, and sniffed Sam's outstretched hand. "Hi," Sam whispered. "I'm the one who was afraid of your cousins. 10 years ago. I know you weren't there, but I'm sorry I was scared. I didn't understand that you were just trying to survive." Ghost sniffed Sam's face, his neck, processing this new human. Then he did something unexpected. He licked Sam's cheek once and lay down with his head on Sam's lap. Sam's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he said to the wolf. "Thank you for showing me it's okay to be afraid and still keep living. Thank you for forgiving people who judge without understanding." Ethan watched from the doorway as Sam stroked Ghost's fur, both of them healing in ways that had nothing to do with physical injuries. Beside him, Thomas Mercer stood with tears streaming openly down his face. "My boy's voice came back because of this wolf," Mercer said quietly. "How do you repay something like that?" "You already are," Ethan said. "You're building him a home. You're teaching your son about redemption. That's payment enough." The enclosure was finished in 3 weeks. But by then, something interesting had happened. Ghost had started spending less time in the house and more time outside, exploring the woods that bordered Ethan's property. At first, Ethan worried he was going to run away. But Ghost always returned by evening, often with Sam, who'd taken to hiking with the wolf on the trails. "He's not running," Sarah observed one evening, watching Ghost patrol the perimeter of what would become his enclosure. "He's checking the territory, making sure it's safe. He's claiming this as his space." She was right. Over the next few days, Ghost's behavior shifted from that of a guest to that of a resident. He marked trees. He howled at dawn and dusk. Not distress calls, but territorial announcements. He'd found a high point on Ethan's property where he could sit and survey everything, and he spent hours there, alert and watchful. "He's telling other wolves this is his land," Sarah said. "He's saying, 'I'm still here. I'm still strong. This is mine.'" The first educational presentation was scheduled for late March at Sarah's middle school. Sarah had prepared a detailed PowerPoint about wolf biology, behavior, and conservation. But the real star was Ghost himself. They'd worked with him for weeks on basic commands: sit, stay, come, not because he needed to be controlled, but because the audience needed to see that he was safe, that he could be managed, that wolves weren't the mindless killers of fairy tales. The school gymnasium was packed. Students, teachers, parents, and curious community members filled every seat. A special enclosure had been set up in the center, chain-link panels forming a demonstration area. News crews from 3 local stations had cameras ready. Ethan was nervous. Ghost had been calm at home, but this was different. This was noise and crowds and strange smells and hundreds of eyes watching. Sarah, by contrast, was completely composed. She stood at the microphone in a dress her mother had bought her years ago, her red hair braided neatly down her back, and spoke with quiet confidence. "My name is Sarah Briggs, and this is Ghost. 3 months ago, my father found Ghost hanging from a cliff, dying. He'd been alone for years after being injured and exiled from his pack. He had every reason to hate humans. We've shot him, trapped him, driven him from his home, killed his family. But when my father risked his own life to save Ghost, do you know what Ghost did? He chose to trust. He chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, not all humans were monsters." She paused, letting that sink in. Then she gestured, and Ethan opened the side door. Ghost entered the gymnasium, and the crowd gasped. He was magnificent. All silvery gray fur and amber eyes and that distinctive white chest patch that made him unmistakable. His limp was visible but didn't diminish his dignity. He walked beside Ethan without a leash, his attention focused on Sarah. When he reached her, he sat on command, his tail wagging. "Wolves are not the villains we've made them in stories," Sarah continued. "They're intelligent social animals who live in family groups and care for their young and their elderly. They're essential to healthy ecosystems. And yes, they're predators, but so are we. The difference is wolves kill only what they need to survive. Humans kill for sport, for fear, for convenience." She walked the audience through everything she'd learned. Wolf social structure, hunting behaviors, communication through howls and body language, the way wolves actually benefit ecosystems by controlling deer populations and allowing vegetation to regenerate. Then she brought out Sam Mercer. "This is my friend Sam," Sarah said. 10 years ago, when he was 7, Sam witnessed a wolf pack killing sheep. It was traumatic. He stopped speaking for a decade because of that trauma. His mother took her own life because of the pain in their family. His father spent years hunting wolves, trying to kill the pain by killing what he thought caused it. Sam stepped forward, his hand resting on Ghost's head. The wolf looked up at him with complete trust. "I was wrong to be afraid," Sam said, his voice carrying across the silent gymnasium. "I thought wolves were evil, but they were just hungry, just trying to feed their families, just doing what their nature told them to do. The evil wasn't in them. It was in my mind, in my fear, in the stories I told myself about what they were." He knelt beside Ghost. "This wolf taught me that it's possible to survive terrible things. That being broken doesn't mean being worthless. That trust can be rebuilt even after it's been shattered. And that sometimes the scariest things turn out to be the most beautiful." Ghost licked Sam's face, and the gymnasium erupted in applause. The presentations became a regular thing. Schools, community centers, environmental groups. Everyone wanted to hear Sarah and Sam talk about Ghost. The wolf who'd survived everything and chosen forgiveness, the living proof that coexistence between humans and wildlife was possible. In May, 6 months after the rescue, Dr. Crawford arrived for her scheduled inspection. She walked through the enclosure, now lush with spring growth. She observed Ghost interacting with Sarah and Sam and a small group of elementary school students who'd come for a presentation. The wolf was calm, patient, allowing the children to ask questions and observe him from a safe distance behind the fence. "He's thriving," Crawford said to Ethan. "His weight is up, his coat is healthy. His behavior is appropriate, alert but not aggressive, interested but not anxious. Whatever you're doing, it's working." "It's not me," Ethan said. "It's Sarah and Sam and even Mercer. They've given him something none of us realized he needed." "What's that?" "Purpose. He spent years surviving alone, just trying to get through each day. Now he has a role. He's a teacher, an ambassador. He's showing people that wolves aren't monsters. That's powerful. That's meaningful." Even a wolf can understand that. Crawford smiled. You know what? I think you're right. I've studied wolves for 20 years, and I've never seen one adapt to captivity this well. But then again, I've never seen a wolf who was given a choice. Ghost chose this, chose you, chose to stay, even though he could leave. It was true. The enclosure gate was often open during the day when Sarah was home from school. Ghost could walk out any time he wanted. Sometimes he did, going on long walks through the property or into the adjacent forest. But he always returned. This was his territory now. These were his people. One evening in late May, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples over the Montana mountains, Ethan found Sarah sitting on the porch with Ghost's head in her lap. The wolf was drowsing, content, while Sarah stroked his ears. "Mom would have loved him," Sarah said quietly. She would have said he was proof that broken things can be made whole. Your mom was proof of that too, Ethan said, sitting beside them. She went through hell with the cancer treatments. There were days she wanted to give up, but she kept fighting, kept hoping, kept believing that every day was a gift. That's what Ghost does. Every day he chooses to keep going, chooses to trust, chooses life over despair. "I miss her," Sarah whispered. "Me too, honey. Every single day." Ghost opened one eye, looked at them both, then closed it again. His tail thumped twice against the wooden porch boards. "Ghost misses someone too," Sarah said. "I can tell. Sometimes he howls at night, and it's not a territorial call. It's sadness. He's calling for his mate, for his pack, for the family he lost." "Maybe that's why he understands us," Ethan said. "We're all missing someone. We're all carrying losses we can't put down. But we're carrying them together now." That makes them a little lighter. Inside the house, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from Thomas Mercer. Sam got accepted to Montana State Wildlife Biology Program. Says he wants to study wolf conservation. Says Ghost inspired him. "Thank you for giving my son a future." Ethan showed Sarah the text. She smiled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "See? Ghost is saving people, just like Dad saved him. It's all connected. One act of kindness, one choice to help instead of hurt, and it ripples out, touching everyone." As darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one over the mountains, Ghost began to howl. It was a sound that had frightened people for millennia, but here, now, it sounded like something else entirely. It sounded like home. And from somewhere deep in the forest, impossibly far away, another howl answered back. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't saving a life. It's choosing to trust again after life has broken your heart. Ethan lost his wife. Sarah lost her mother. Thomas lost everything he loved. And Ghost? He lost his mate, his pack, his place in the world. 4 souls carrying grief so heavy it threatened to crush them. But somewhere between a frozen cliff and a warm shed, between fear and forgiveness, they found something precious. Proof that broken things can heal when given patience, compassion, and time. Ghost could have stayed wild and alone, protecting himself from further pain. Instead, he chose to trust the hand that reached for him. He chose to believe that not every human would hurt him. And in doing so, he taught a grieving father how to love again, gave a lonely girl purpose, and showed a broken man that redemption was possible. We've all been there, hanging from our own cliffs, wondering if we have the strength to hold on one more day. But this story reminds us that help often comes from unexpected places, that second chances exist even when we think we've used them all up, and that the capacity to forgive ourselves and others might be the most powerful survival tool we possess. What loss have you survived that made you stronger? Have you ever been surprised by who or what helped you heal? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.